And good morning, good afternoon, whatever it might be for you. My name's Kevin, and this is Project 180. I want to thank everybody for coming today, especially our guest, Linda Tali. How are you today?
Hi, I'm happy to be here, and good afternoon from my side. So I'm good.
Good.
Enjoy winter weather.
Well, if anybody can, I'm glad you are enjoying. Now, I know, Linda, you're based in Estonia,
Yes.
but I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and about your background to get us started.
So a little bit about myself. Yes, I'm based in Estonia, originally from Estonia. Why I say originally from Estonia is because for the past 10, 15 years of my career, I've been actually working in different continents, including like countries, Australia, New Zealand, China for 7 years. I've also touched some ground in America, helping companies to promote themselves in American market. But yes, currently I'm in Estonia working for an Estonian startup in technology field that actually creates AI-powered 3D content. So I work there as a project manager, and I also help another company, tech company, on consultation for the business development in Europe. So yes, that's the short little quick explanation and introduction of myself.
It's hard to be quick when your experience is that vast. When you're talking about multiple countries, continents, and industries, it's quite an impressive resume. So I really appreciate you taking the time today because I know you're busy. So thanks for coming. What we want to talk about today with obviously with you and the collected folks on the call is that startup environment. This is something that I know, Linda, we've met before. We've chatted a bit about this before. So it seemed like a good, fun topic to get into in terms of how project managers can fit into, a startup kind of situation. So they come in all sorts of shapes, sizes. Startups can be huge. They can be small. They can be, any industry. They can be not-for-profit. They can be tech. They can be lots of different things. But there's always seems to be that element of chaos. So I'm curious, in your experience, why do you think why do you think there is that kind of element in terms of being a startup company? Why is it so muddy when you're first starting off?
Yes. So like we said, startups are different sizes. So we have startups that have up to 10 people. We have startups up to 50 people. We have startups up to 100, then 500, right? So some people like to even describe them as the levels of education, like kindergarten level, you have the primary school level, then high school, college, and then you graduate and you're like, voila, big company, and you try to succeed. So if we're talking about the chaos in startups, it's actually their very nature is to embrace chaos in startups. So I can give you, let's say, for few examples, like the uncertainty is the main thing, right? Startups operate in this kind of like unknown environment. They grapple with questions like, will the product succeed? How will the market respond? What challenges lie ahead? So that all creates and breeds the chaos, right? Then there's also like navigating those uncertain waters that no one has ever touched before. So they encounter the new data, like you always need to adjust. You need to maybe look through your roadmaps that you had before and then the product market fit. So you need to adapt all the time. Then there's also pivots and adaptation again. So startups must be agile. That is a must. That's not even a questionable. They need to be agile. So when the market shifts or the user feedback demands changes, they need to pivot, right? So the simple example for that is like you're the captain of the ship and you're trying to go through those stormy seas. So sometimes you just need to change the course quickly, right? You can't go through that stormy sea and hope the crew will survive and fingers crossed we're not going to sink today. But sometimes you just
I love that. Yeah.
You need to take that step. It's like you can't go through there and just like sacrifice everyone and hoping for the best. So you just need to go around it and just navigate. So of course, that chaos actually creates freedom. So creativity freedom, more specifically. So it allows you to be creative. It gives the team members the freedom to explore the unconventional solutions. And chaos is not always, how to say, a bad thing. It can be also a good thing. Like, for instance, this creative freedom, right? So in startups, everything changes fast. You need to adapt fast. You need to be creative how to tackle the things. And that's why working in a startups, it can be very stressful, but also very rewarding, because you can actually make an impact in something what you do. But again, like, you just need to admit, startup is a place for chaos. You just need to be very wise how you manage it efficiently. So just embrace it. It's something you can't change, never. Even a corporation can be chaotic, but startup is like, how to say, a notch higher in the chaos than any other company.
Fair enough. I've certainly worked in my share, a handful of startups over the years in different industries, most in tech, but in different kind of variations of tech, right? And it's always the same, because you're right. Like it's. And I when I say chaos, I didn't mean it in a negative way, because I think a lot of people really enjoy that, and that's what you're alluding to as well. It's like there's that freedom there, and there's that capacity to really do something that's kind of fun, and you don't necessarily know what to expect, the next day, the next week, the next month. So when you're working in that environment, you're working on product X, and you think, okay, this is going to be the big sell. It's going to be a huge thing, but nope, it doesn't happen. So they pivot it. Now it's product Y. And now maybe this side. So like the whole company can shift in days, right? Depending on what the market is demanding.
Yeah, that's true.
And so to come in and to reel this into project management, because we're all project manager nerds here, that is a tough thing to do. As I know, it's something you've worked in, something I've worked in, and probably a lot of others on the call. But you're coming in as a project manager, and it's almost like you're trying to apply some kind of structure to things.
Yes.
Sometimes that's the feel, right? Like, oh, here comes the PM. They're gonna take the chaos away. How would you describe the experience of going into a startup, like a tech startup, as a project manager? How would you approach it? How would you walk into that room and kind of get things moving?
So the first thing what you need to consider when you actually enter that environment is also analyze your own capacity, your own skills. Because how to say, startup life is not for everyone. You either can adapt with it or you can't. So you need to first ask yourself, are you willing to take that leap in that risk? Because actually startups are very risky business. It's not like public sector companies where you have a little bit more like security and this kind of like stable workflow. Startups, one day you can be there, next day you can be down at the bottom and everything is done. So you need to actually first analyze yourself, see if you're capable of actually adapting with that kind of environment, and if you want to handle that. Because like you said, like project manager, you're expected in some ways, you're expected to clean up that chaos, that mess, or those ups and downs, and get some order into it. So you're expected to do that. You're also expected to not just be a, how to say, project manager. You have so many different hats that you have to wear in a startup, especially if we're talking about startup. You can be one day a financial advisor, working on the budgets, negotiating contracts. The second day, you're checking your timelines, the scope of the work. Then you're managing the team. Then you're a partnership manager. Then, I don't know, a week later, they fly you out to Las Vegas to the company. So you're not just a project manager. So if you're entering that company, of course, you need to have like a clear communication. So the clear communication is very important. You need to have that clear communication between your teams, because everybody needs to work on the same goal. We can't do it like, yes, we say like we're very open for everyone's creativity and innovations, and everyone can come up with the ideas and all that. But as a project manager, you still need to keep that team as one big ball. The ball has to expand together and together. You can't go like there's a spike here, there's a spike there, and a spike there, and everybody goes their direction, and those spikes are just like spreading, and at the end, the ball will explode. So as a project manager, you actually need to communicate clearly what the company is looking for, what is the vision. But that also comes down to your communication with the C-level, especially the founder. If you start the job or you have an interview, I would even recommend to have the interview, if possible, with the C-level, either the CEO or the co-founder, to actually see what is the vision that they have. So when you're having that interview also, you can also analyze based on their replies if that company has a future, or it's like a red flags, ding, 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 error. Right? Because I've met many startup founders who are good what they do. Let's say they're product managers previously on specific product. They're amazing what they do. But when it comes to being the vision builder, they crumble. So sometimes they don't have even a clear vision. They have a clear product, but they don't have a clear vision. But if you don't have the clear vision and a goal, or you're asking from your CEO, it's like, okay, so what is our 5-year plan? Or what is your 5-year plan? He better have the idea. It doesn't have to be like well structured, because like I said, like startup is very agile. It changes, right? But you need to have some sort of like vision in your head where you want to go, what you want to be. If they have that, you can help that company to keep that vision and also communicate that to your team to keep that vision and work together of making that happen.
Yeah.
So when you see that red flag, like CEO says, like, yeah, let's take a step at a time. I've actually heard that many times, like, gosh, let's do step at a time. Like, that's a big red flag. I don't recommend you enter that kind of company ever.
It's interesting. I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, and in terms of the red flags, especially, and when you're entering that company, you need to know where it wants to go, and you need to have a good understanding. You don't have to know everything about the industry as a PM coming in. You don't have to know all that at the start, but it's good to know something, and it's good to know a bit about competitors and the landscape too, so you know what you're getting into. And when you start, assuming that you've got everything on your checklist and you start this new job as a project manager, you talked a lot about communication too, and that ball, and making sure that everybody's kind of consistent and that's all growing together, which is a really nice image. I like that. I find that's one of the biggest parts of the PM role in a little organization like that, is just to maintain that communication, to make sure that communication is happening consistently. Because it's easy once a company gets past 5 or 6 people, it's easy for little factions to develop. And again, not a negative thing. I don't mean a negative thing, but there's a little like a team over here. Oh, we're going to try and do this, and then we're going to try and do this, and they start pulling apart a little bit. You really have to make sure that everybody's communicating well, and I think that's part of the PM skill set that you can bring. You're not necessarily worried about project managing, making sure the tasks are all done by next Tuesday. That's not your main focus. Your main focus is much bigger, and making sure that the team is communicating and following the vision that you're talking about as well.
Yes, because like you said, like also depending on the size, I'm not sure how I haven't had that much experience with American startups, but in Europe, startups are more like, they call it the flat structure. So they keep saying like their company has a flat structure, but in my eyes, if it's a flat structure, that means I can go to CEO directly, right? But then it's like, oh no, you need to like go through me. Then it's not flat structure. But here's the thing. It depends on the size. So that's why also like, the kindergarten and the high school and all that comes into play, because, when you're a small startup with 1 to 10 people, it's very simple. It's like, by nature, everybody communicates in the 10 people team. It's not hard. It's like, even if you're remote, you still like chit chat on the messages, or even if you're in the office, it's a very tight knit community, right? You don't need that much structure. If we're going into 50 plus people, you can't expect to have the same structure anymore. Like Kevin mentioned, you still need someone to keep that, team together. So you need to, layer a little bit, even if the company, because I've met one company who didn't want a structure at all. They wanted to keep very flat. But after reaching that 50 plus, it's never going to work. Because you need to start, you're starting to have your divisions, you're starting to have your teams, and you need to have that organizational, like a structure that you have, let's say, a division head. It can be still very transparent. It's not like a dictatorship, like, okay, now I'm your project manager, you're my team, you listen what I do. It's not like that. It's still this kind of like a transparent communication, but there's this person who, keeps an eye on everything what is happening and helps to keep that team together, still to go to that same goal. So even, let's say, on top of me, there's another person. Of course, like my team members can go directly to them because it is kind of flat in that way. But still, like, the bigger the company is, that one person can't take all the responsibility anymore. You can't handle, like, if it grows into 100, 500, you can't have just like CEO taking all the decisions, right? You need to start structuring. So that's also important. So size of the company also really matters when it comes to startups and how it's organized.
Yeah, I agree. I think the matter of I think you're right about the number of 50, because I've been in the company that was 10, I've been in the company that was 20. And that's when it starts to get a little sticky in terms of communicating, right? And at 50 and above, it's just like you need to have a little more formalized structure. And I think at that point too, that's where the project manager can be a benefit. Yes. Right? Because you're not necessarily just taking on, head count or something like that, but you're helping organize things. And maybe in a startup, depends on a lot of variables. But if you have certain experience that maybe the executive doesn't, you can then recommend. You're part of kind of more corporate level decision making as well, in terms of how the organization's structured, how the teams function, which is really critical too.
True.
So, without naming names, and we obviously don't want to go into like specific people or companies, but is there an experience that you've had that was really, really good, or really, really not good, maybe in terms of being a startup, that's something that you've learned from, or a particular anecdote or story that you maybe just learned, this has been a good experience, or maybe this has been a bad experience?
I think I've been quite lucky, but not lucky. I think it's my mentality. It's more of my approach on work and companies, because I try to take everything positively. It's like, no matter what's happening, I try to see the positive thing. It's like, even if the management is maybe a little bit wobbly, I still try to see the positive things, because it comes down to me, the trust. Because especially with the startups, you may have the owner who starts the business, right? Who is an expert. Specifically, one company that I did the consultation, the owner of the company was the industry expert. He knew exactly the technology. He was amazing in that tech field and that product. But there was a little downside. He was not a business person. So if you're in that position and you do not have those capacities or skills to run business, of course you hire people, right? So that's the reason why companies hire people, to get the expertise.
Yeah.
Because you cover something that they're maybe not that familiar with. But here comes the matter of trust. What I mean by trust is specifically with that company, they hire people, but they don't trust their judgment. So you may speak out, they're very open for ideas and all that, but at the end of the day, they listen, but they do not listen. Meaning like they're there, ears open, the meeting ends, and nothing changes because they hear you out, but they didn't listen. So that was one of the, bad experience, because you see the potential of the company, you see the potential of the product, but then there is one big obstacle that actually does not allow the company to grow. And no one is able to, you're never able to remove CEO, right? You can't do that. So, but there was also never a person who was able to get to him. So in my eyes, that kind of company will not succeed unless they start trusting the people, the experts they have actually hired into the team.
Yeah.
So that was, one of the interesting experiences that I had. But rest of it has been good, because like we always say, like startup is very hectic, but it's very rewarding. So it depends and comes down to your mentality, how you see things and how you tackle things.
Sorry. Oh, no, I am unmuted. Okay, I'll cut that part out later, hopefully. I find it interesting, and I want to open it up to questions. We're almost at 8:30, so if you have a question, by all means, please, folks, click the raise hand button or type it in the text box, and we can extend the conversation. But I appreciate what you're saying about attitude and your perspective kind of going in. Like when I was in a startup 20-something years ago, I was obviously much younger and not as experienced, and I found it more difficult then, I think, being in a startup environment, because I needed a little bit more structure, and I just didn't quite get how this chaos was going to work. You know, like I started my career in big companies that had processes for everything, and so to go a place that was just chaos was really, really difficult. But at this point, you know, with gray hair and wrinkles on my face, I can go into this place, go, yeah, it's fine. You know, it doesn't impact me the same way as it did. The chaos doesn't hit me the way it used to. So I think maybe it's just depends on the person you are, but also the stage you are in your career, your life, where you're a bit more zen maybe about these things. Like, yeah, that's just the way it's going to be. Like, we're going to figure it out. Maybe it'll be a huge success. Maybe it won't. But you know, the ride doesn't have to be difficult.
Yeah, I remember I was the same. When I started in startup, I was like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? It's like, I just came from the company that has like templates for everything, you know, all the contracts are just like fill in. And then I went to a startup and they didn't even have a contract. And I was like, how do you even manage? But you adapt. So it comes down to personality for sure. Like, that's why I'm also saying, like, when you join the startup, you need to think first. Are you able to work in that environment? Because we keep saying, like, there is a chaos. There's almost no structure for sure when it's a starting company. We're not talking about 10 years, but even in a 10-year startup, you know, they can be like very hectic.
Yep.
you won't have any like structure. You will not have any guidance whatsoever. You are there to do your job. That's why you were hired for that position, right? So it comes down to personality also, and your confidence. If you're confident, everything is doable. Like even when I started in technology company, I had no idea about technology. I came from like retail, manufacturing background. I didn't know anything about technology, but I had my expertise. I was like certain about my skills. I knew what kind of skills I have. So I wasn't terrified of jumping into that company that was technology field, because everything is like, you can study everything. And luckily, I feel that I'm a person who adapts really quickly. As you can see, I've been all over the world, living in, even in China, that is like very different culture and all that, but I adapt quickly. So it comes down to that personality. If you're adaptable, if you're good at stress tolerance, because this job, in general, project management is very stressful, no matter if it's a startup or a corporation. But in a startup, it's even more. I even started meditating after starting working in startups. I literally took like half an hour every night to meditate. So yeah.
That's great, because I do the same thing, so I think that's funny as well. We do have a question coming in from Katie, so let's read that. Do you have any recommendations for those of us just getting started in startup project management, how to get our foot in the door, so to speak? Any resume building advice? Thank you. That's a really good question. I think actually, just to carry on with what you were saying, Linda, it's about being adaptable. So if you can demonstrate your adaptability, your agility, and I don't mean in terms of agile project management or software methodologies, but just in terms of being flexible in your way of thinking, and that you have a varied skill set, is probably the way to go. I've seen folks come into small organizations, and project managers specifically. Okay, we have to write the project charter first. Then we have to write the project plan. We have to develop a very detailed risk register, and we have to do all this stuff. And the company's just staring at them like, what? you need to know those things. You need to know how to do those things, but you can't go in expecting the organization to follow that, project management rule book. You have to be able to adapt to the environment and to work with it. So if you can demonstrate that, with your resume or with articles maybe you're writing on LinkedIn or anything like that, if part of your brand is that adaptability, I think that certainly helps. But Linda, you've got thoughts on that?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. It's like adaptability is the key for those kind of things. Building a resume, that can actually be very tricky, especially when it comes to startups, because okay. The other factor that you need to consider is the demographics, where you're going to work. Because let's be honest, like American markets, even building a resume that you build in America doesn't work in Europe whatsoever. So every, continent even has a different requirements for resume building. For instance, America, you like to have, the education credentials, good background on that, big companies backing you up. And then, it's easier to enter the companies, right? In Europe, it's a little bit more like emotional intelligence, how you communicate, how you succeed in your career. Not so important about education. Of course, education is important, but it's not the number one thing. It's more about your skill set. So Asia is also, it's about education. It's 100% of education. So building a resume, you also need to consider where you're going to apply first, and then adapt your resume based on those things. Then startups hiring, again, sometimes they don't even look at your background, because that's what happened. I was hired for a technology company without having any technical knowledge. And it was an AI 3D company. And I was like, even when they called me back and they were like, yeah, we're making you an offer. And I was like, how did I even secure this job? It's like, I don't have any experience. But when they were looking, they were actually, I know exactly why they hired me. They were looking for a person who can communicate. They didn't look at the skill set on technology. They were looking the person who can actually bring the teams together, who can maybe budget, organize, who's like a critical thinker, right? So always when you're starting to apply, what you should do is check out the company that you're applying for. Analyze what kind of company it is, what they do, what's their vision. You can even talk with employees who actually work there. You can ask like, how is your work culture? Like, what does the company value the most? And based on that, you can also build your resume. Because sometimes, yes, the startup hirings is very random. It can come down to just like one, I don't know, a good interview session. And they're like, yeah, I like this person and the personality and the way they think, no matter what their skill set. So very hard to say like how to build a resume, but like we always say, adapt. Try to adapt everything.
I again, I agree. The only add-on, I think, in terms of, and Katie mentioned about excellent points. Didn't know about the differences between countries have on resumes, so that's really informative thought. I hadn't thought of that too. I've worked in Canada forever, so I've never really thought of that. But I think too, one of the things you can do if you're looking to get into whatever the industry, startup or otherwise, is networking and make connections, because that's like, there's going to be a job posting and 10,000 people are going to apply for it, and that little startup has maybe one HR person, maybe, and they're going to be going through all these resumes and trying to find the right fit, and it's really hard for them to do that. Sometimes it's better or easier just to, hey Bob, over at such and such a company, you guys are doing interesting stuff, can we talk sometime? I'm curious about what you do. You're not necessarily looking for a job, you're not trying to schmooze them into a job, but you're doing it as a networking opportunity to make a good connection, maybe make a friend, make a contact, and at some point later, 6 months on or a year on, maybe they're looking for somebody like you. So it's worth, if you're interested in a particular industry, start reaching out to people who work in that industry and just asking them questions. And then all of a sudden you're in a conversation with them, and when that company does expand a bit, maybe they give you a call. But I find that's a really critical way of expanding your career options, basically.
Yeah, that's a good thing, because let's be honest, even for the startups, many of them don't even advertise the jobs. Even if they're looking for someone, they don't advertise it. They look through their network, or they ask the person who works in that team, is like, do you know anyone who is interested in maybe in partnership or sales or something? So it's all about like networking. So like Kevin said, just reach out to people, because you never know. It's like, I know companies who never post any job ads, and their like numbers are getting higher and higher, and you are wondering like how. But it's because people approach those companies. If it's a good startup, people start approaching. So that's also how they just start hiring. They already have that talent pool to select from, And if they can't find anyone from that pool, then they go and post a job ad. Unless it's the requirement, because like I said, different continents, different countries have a different requirements how to do things.
Fair enough. Katie, you said you had another question. Feel free to unmute and jump in.
Okay. All right. First of all, thank you so much. This has been really informative. Another question is there a certain management style that you look towards, agile versus waterfall, or do you kind of just freestyle?
So the management style, it depends on the company. So if we're talking about software development companies, then it's Scrum, right? There's companies who like Agile, there's companies who like Waterfall. There's companies who actually have a combination of the whole beautiful world of project management. So it comes down to the company, what's their, let's say, product, what they do, and also how they like to approach. So there isn't really a straightforward answer to that. But if you're interested in working, it's always good to have the whole skill set. You can just in LinkedIn, you can take agile courses, you can learn different project management approaches and all that. So that's the other thing. When you're starting in startup or a new field, always learn. And there's so many free resources to educate yourself. Even now, I'm taking different project management courses. Even though I've been doing this job for a long time, I still take new courses because even they're changing. There's new tools coming up. So constant learning and having those skill sets. And after you finish those courses, you can always add those skills on your resume. So depending on the company, then you get that offer. Because yes, companies and startups, excuse me, they don't even tell you, are we doing agile or waterfall? They just push you into there and you're like, you're a project management. Now you do your project manager job. So many of those companies don't even have an approach. So you need to figure that out yourself the hard way.
That's so funny. Is again, like when you're going to project management school, or you're doing your course, whatever, like you learn all the standards and all the process and stuff. But the company is doing a mix, because every company does a mix of them, and there's not necessarily a particular way of doing it ever. But when you're entering a company like that, whatever the industry, it's best to kind of step back and see how they're doing what they're doing, because they're successful, right? Whatever they're doing is working to some degree, and you can be the one who kind of comes in and start enhancing and making suggestions and minor efficiencies and listening to them and figuring things out to help improve. But you got to go in thinking it's working. Whatever they're doing is working out. No matter how chaotic it is, they're successful. So you have to make sure you're approaching it in a respectful way.
Yeah, that's for sure. Always listen. That's why we say communication. And when you start, it's not just don't be like a headless chicken. Like Kevin said, just take a step back. Give yourself a week or two. Startup moves so fast, right? Of course, they expect you to act fast and fail fast. That's the mentality. But still, the first week or 2 weeks, just take a step back, analyze, assess, and communicate. So talk with your team members, and then you can even figure out what kind of approach they're using, or if there's some improvements. And if you see there's improvements, let's say you think Scrum is better than Agile, in that case, you can always implement that and suggest that. But always just look further at the beginning and then start taking actions.
100%. I want to offer up a chance for anybody else to jump in. Feel free to raise your hand or type something in the chat. We've got a few minutes to go.
Or ask whatever you like.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be just about startups at this point. We can talk about anything you like, but I want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to ask a question should they like to. And with that, maybe I can ask you one more thing, Linda, and then we'll wrap things up. But I know you've worked in a lot of different places, a lot of different industries, cultures, countries. You've been around a lot of different places. What have you really learned, or what have you picked up that was maybe a surprise to you in terms of your career, your developing career? Like what kind of came to you as like, oh wow, I wish I'd known this before.
Actually, I've learned a lot, especially having that massive culture exposure actually has taught me one thing for sure. It taught me to read people. Not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. So what I mean by reading people is I I like to analyze people. Even when I first time meet them, maybe I look a little bit cold and not the most approachable person, but it's usually because it's my time to assess you. Because especially when you're a project manager, your job is communication, right? Your job is build those relationships. Your job is to build those teams. So you need to analyze and assess all the team members, all the stakeholders. So that's what I learned, is how to communicate with different people, because different cultures, you need to be sensitive in different topics, right? Different countries, you need to approach things differently. So like I said, the business in America, business in Europe, business in China, they're like 360 degrees. They're completely opposite. So all that cultural awareness that I've actually gathered, even working with like multicultural teams, has actually helped me to build this skill set to communicate efficiently with different different level people, from C-level to just like everyday people on the street, and also how to approach them. Because how to say, when you're even negotiating, if you're negotiating budgets and contracts, you need to be, how to say, very diplomatic. Diplomatic in that way that you need to analyze the situation, right? You need to analyze the person you're talking to, because there are limits how far you can push. So everyone, when you're negotiating, right, the main goal is what? Succeed, right? To get the profit into your company. That's the most beneficial for you. So you always need to analyze the situation and the person, how far you can push your demands. Yes, they're the client, but you also have the power to negotiate the terms. It's like, yes, the client is the king, but at the same time, in a way, my product is also the king. So you need to know how far to push something and when to stop. That's the skills that I learned from working in different teams, different countries, how far I can push someone. And when it even comes to my team, I know exactly how far I can push my team member before they're burning out. And if I feel my team member is burning out, I back off and I take a different approach of communication. So that's the main thing I think I've learned. And that actually surprised me. Like sometimes I'm like, yeah, it's so simple to see like how far I can push Kevin. But it's like, I don't know. It's like, you know? Yeah.
No, that's interesting too, and I think the universal message there is really about being, again, agility, being adaptable, but also being able to apply your skills in a different way in different contexts, right? Depending on the audience. We have time for one more question. Shang just popped this in the text. So, if possible, what are some must-have project artifacts for a PM to have starting in a startup or as freelance? That's a really good question. The first thing that comes to my mind, Sheng, when I hear that question or read that question, if you're going into the startup and it is very chaotic and there's maybe not a lot of artifacts at all, there's meetings and they make decisions and they pivot and the devs go off and work on the thing that they just agreed on, but not necessarily a lot of documentation about the decision. That alone might be a really good thing to start using, and you can use like an AI tool, like like I was joking earlier about people coming into these calls with their AI note takers. Use one of those in a call and it'll actually analyze what action items are, decisions, things like that. Because I find those little things don't always get done. And so people don't always remember why certain decisions were made or when they were made. So developing that kind of record, I think, might be really helpful as a starting point. Linda, do you have any thoughts there?
I think so too, because in a startup, that's what we always keep saying, like there is nothing. Literally, you have limited resources, you have limited budgets, you have limited tools. So saying like, what is the must-have artifact? Like Kevin said, like you can use the AI tool to take the meeting notes, document for yourself. Even if the company maybe doesn't value that, do it for yourself if that actually helps you. So in this technology like world that we are in now, you have so many tools that can maybe simplify your work or do some tasks. Of course, there's not many tools yet for specifically like project management, but there's still like, meeting notes, report creations, let's say email creations. So you can leverage those and you can do your research, like what kind of tools maybe can benefit that company that you work in specifically. Because again, depending on that company, those artifacts can be very different. Like some companies really don't even care about that documentation that much. They have different priorities. So if you see something is valuable, or you think something is valuable, or if you have experience previously doing something some ways, you can always bring that on the table and either just use it for yourself if it makes it easier for you. Because I know even my coworkers in another startup, they had their own way of managing projects, right? They had their own system. They like lots of documentation, lots of clear instructions. Let's say we had Trello board that was very long with different like columns instead of like to do, in progress, testing, done, right? I like simplicity. So I try to make everything as simple as possible. But I know people who like to make it like very structured, and she had like 10 little columns, and I was like, I don't understand this, because I had to cover that project, and I was like,
I want 2 columns, 2 columns max.
like, explain it to me. But it's like inside the organization, of course, everybody was working the same way, but it comes down to yourself. Maybe my way is not simple for you, and your way is definitely not simple way for me. So you can assess that yourself and bring the tools that you think is actually needed.
Okay, well, look, we'll wrap it there. It's just about 5 minutes to the top of the hour. I want to say, Linda, thank you so much for dropping by and doing this. Really appreciate your time. And thanks everyone else for joining. I really appreciate you all doing this. And watch for the recording on YouTube. It should show up the next week. All right. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.